In 326 BC, a legendary warrior general stepped to the western bank of the Hydaspes River, supported at his rear by 40,000 troops, strong and sharpened. Across from him, the fearsome king Paurava sported an army of 30,000, equipped with elephants which were foreign to the Macedonian men. No small challenge it would be, but Alexander the Great, leading what was unbeknownst to him his final major battle, was a tactician, and he drew on his strategic brilliance. Tricking the opposing king into believing he'd stay put, Alexander led a surprise charge across the river, then split his men and attacked Paurava on either flank. Ultimately, the Macedonian sarissa proved to be the difference, as they allowed soldiers to slay the opposing elephants from a distance. Thus, through iron, conquered Alexander the world. But iron sharpens iron, and Alexander's wisdom would not have been if not for his esteemed teachers. According to tradition, Alexander's father, Philip II, summoned Aristotle to teach Alexander at the Temple of the Nymphs in Mysa. Aristotle himself studied at the Academy of Plato for 20 years, and Plato was the student of Socrates. Through this time-tested chain, Alexander's wit and character were cultivated. It's no different than the NBA's newest conqueror, who's special but not unique. Tyrese Haliburton is just the newest link in a chain time-tested. A chain of philosophers who have all offered answers to one of the sport's oldest questions. When should I pass? Passing is the second oldest tool in the sport, but it is confounding in its simplicity. A pass carries no intrinsic value. Indeed, the only action that carries any intrinsic value is affecting the score directly, through scoring, or its inverse, preventing a score. As such, a pass can only be as valuable as the shot that it eventually leads to, or inversely, the defense that it avoids. This video will consult the musings of 4 legendary thinkers to approach and answer to this ancient question. When should I pass? Well, Magic Johnson loved to pass in transition, where his teammates saw the easiest shots. Magic slowed down his internal clock to read the floor and spoon-feed his teammates accurate passes. This reveals the first crucial element of passing prowess: processing power. When pushing the brake, Magic had an uncanny ability to recognize and anticipate soft spots in the defense almost instantly. As such, he didn't have to waste any time to deliver a pass to a striding receiver's catching pocket for them to make a play. And it was that last part, Magic's willingness to empower his teammates into making their own plays, that set him and his offensive descendants apart. Because on the break here, Magic instantly recognizes that his teammates have a numbers advantage. But because Michael Cooper isn't in position to take an easy shot, many would instinctively disregard this read. Magic had the wherewithal to recognize within a split second that his teammates were capable of making the necessary plays to turn this look into an open shot. And it was this emphasis on teammate involvement that made those Lakers teams so potent. Even against ambiguous defenses at oblique angles, Magic saw through the gaps and could instantaneously assess the weight of the court based on only a handful of defenders. This allowed him to deliver these high-speed bullets through several bodies. Half-court offense was less forgiving, but Magic stuck to his principles, rewarding his teammates for off-ball movement and offensive involvement by getting them the ball in high-pressure areas. Notice here how a pass fake from Johnson throws Larry Bird, and Johnson's own pitcher-like grip strength to deliver this laser with one hand. Because of Magic's excellent timing and anticipatory skills, he was able to deliver dimes very early in the passing window, timing this lob up with Michael Cooper's jump, and this timing added an additional incentive for his teammates to join the offensive fray, with the comfortable, well-placed, and well-timed Johnson passes being easy to convert and minimally taxing for teammates who only had to do one thing: score. Magic was poised when these low-hanging offensive opportunities did not make themselves available. Still, he entrusted his teammates to make plays in the half-court, identifying these semi-advantages where his teammates would have a conceptual edge of sorts. Here being Mitch Kupchak penetrating into the second line of the defense that placed only a minor strain on very capable teammates of making a play to drive offense. This often manifested in these intermediate passes, where instead of passing it directly to a posted-up big at a tough angle, Magic would pass it off to another player who had an easier look at the same feed. When Magic's teammates struggled to create against a defensive look, however, he would act as a safety valve for them, resetting the offensive possession to try to get somebody else involved. And part of being an exit valve was moving off of the ball, himself entering a high danger location of the floor where a subsequent pass would be high quality offense. And all of these traits, his recognition, passing touch, willingness to trust teammates, and deliver the ball to high pressure areas would culminate in his seminal skill, entry passing, where Magic could shift the ceiling big to a more favorable catching pocket with a purposefully off-target pass, sometimes loosening his control over the ball to float it over the top with his body fending off defenders. Magic could lob these in softly because his length allowed him to optimize the arc of his passes. Interior passes are the most valuable, not only because they lead to high quality inside shots, but also that they collapse the defense and open up opportunities for perimeter shooters. So Magic's knack for entry passing made the entire offense less congested, further encouraging teammate participation. For the Showtime Lakers, Magic's passing ethic was needed to ensure that everybody ate. Magic's tendencies seemed to be a consequence of his answer to the age-old question. Why pass? Well, for Magic and the Lakers to be the best at a team sport, you needed the whole team. Magic's facilitation relied on the core tenets of teamwork and selflessness, but NBA strategy would become more streamlined as the years went on, and NBA offenses became increasingly redefined by the influx of the pick and roll. The inception of this vaunted action can't be attributed to one sole progenitor, but its pre-2000s usage is most commonly associated with the shrewd and steady-handed John Stockton, who made his teams better by putting the ball in the right spot. Excellent though Stockton was, his lack of true offensive dynamism challenged his ability to be a lone offensive centerpiece of an elite team. 2 years after Stockton retired, his game would be completed. Steve Nash was the best pocket passer in NBA history, pillowing these balls in through nanoscopic gaps with both hands.
Look at that pass by Steve Nash. Very little room.
And this ambidexterity could stretch out the geometry of the action, with Nash gradually reeling the dropping big towards him until the roller was wide open. Nash's first love was soccer, but his hands were phenomenal, varying the release speed and angle of these passes to hit his rollers in stride. This vital quality was the same one we observed in Magic Johnson. These plays unravel in a mere second or two, but Nash had superhuman timing, and his incredibly prompt pocket passes gave the opposing big almost no margins to recover if he had even been microscopically behind the play. To additionally daze the opposing big, Nash could involve some cunning. Here, a jump pass bluffs the floater, which gets the big to commit, and these hot potatoes weren't always too hot. These pristine pocket passes rendered drop coverage hard to justify against Steve Nash. But the reason teams play drop coverage in the first place is that it keeps the floor level and the action a 2-on-2, while not ostensibly conceding any mismatches. When teams threw other coverages at Nash, the balance of the floor shifted, defenders shifted in response, and a game of cat and mouse would ensue. So when should I pass? Steve Nash loved to pass after straining the defense or inducing a coverage that would invariably concede the offense an advantage, inside of which his teammates would have to do nothing more than finish off an easy task. In positions like these, Nash demonstrated a preternatural ability to read the floor or diagnose the intentions of various defenders. Switching was not as trendy back then as it has become in recent years, and that was because the roster constructions of yesteryear couldn't prevent mismatches like these from being exploited. And to Nash's credit, he made those intermediary passes to get the ball inside as efficiently as possible. The next option was some type of hedge, which is where the big stunts the ball handler and then attempts to recover to his man. Against a soft hedge like the one Pau Gasol shows here, Nash's incredible split-second timing is again on display, putting these balls on the roll before Gasol even gets there. As the hedges got harder, the backline defenders became more involved, and it would be on Nash to detect the subtle changes in their movement or lack thereof, because here the non-committal Kwame Brown concedes the open jumper. Here, Nash spots out of the corner of his eye a half-hearted rotation from Lamar Odom, so the obvious counter is to, despite using his left hand for the entire possession, laser this right-handed dot to Odom's man so that he could create with an open floor. The most desperate form of a hedge is the blitz, which works against frenetic ball handlers who aren't expecting it, but would inevitably lead to a huge defensive asymmetry that, when the poised Nash put the ball in rotation, could easily be exploited by his teammates. The idea of the blitz is to get the ball out of a specific player's hands at all costs. And while this sounds good in theory, teams would certainly rather live with the offense being dictated by any of Nash's teammates rather than Nash himself. Nash wasn't really bothered by the coverage because in the middle of the floor, it didn't compromise his elite peripheral vision. The next step up from the blitz is ice, where the big continues to play high while the ball handler is forced towards the baseline. Ice is an extremely committal coverage, but when executed well, it stifles many guards, even some all-stars, because it takes away so many primary reads. That said, if Nash had been an ordinary second-rate guard, he wouldn't have been featured in this video. Steve Nash is legendary for many reasons, but his eponymous Nash dribble is ingrained in basketball lore. The Nash dribble is when a ball handler, stymied by the initial defensive coverage, keeps their dribble alive to continue probing the floor. The idea being that the resources allocated by the defense to stop Nash are resources that aren't present elsewhere, so a compression here means a rarefaction on the other side of the floor for teammates to exploit. These were the same conceptual semi-advantages as before, where it wasn't necessarily clear what Nash's teammates would do, but they had the privilege of attacking a so-called tilted defense that made finishing the play easier. Nash dribbling requires an incredibly tight and coordinated handle, and was perfected by Nash due to his ability to stop and change directions on a dime. And this unique skill meant that Nash would maintain his effectiveness against well-executed drops that managed to take away his pocket passing. The king of the drop in the 2000s was Tim Duncan, whose length and timing was difficult to fit a pocket pass underneath. So Nash would slip under Duncan's nose to get the ball to the other side of the floor, where his team could score, or he could simply reset the action and try again.
Bowen corrects Nash. Nash gets by. Diaw for three.
The Nash dribble is emblematic of Nash's perseverance on the offensive end, not giving up on the play just because his first or second read is taken away. And it was this characteristic perseverance that helped Nash be elite off of the ball. Just like Magic, Nash was a reset valve for his teammates, but owing to the far better spacing of Nash's era, there was more to gain from relocations like these because there were far more angles to drive to the basket from. So when Nash got rid of the ball, he instinctively looked to get it back, if his teammates weren't operating inside of a clear advantage, because the already shaky defense had a chance to completely collapse on the reset. Additionally, Nash was a solid and willing screener. Put it all together and you get possessions like this, where Nash sets a flare screen to create space and then goes into a drive and kick. But his kickout option doesn't have anything, so Nash goes for the reset. And on the reset goes into another pick and roll action to find the same kickout for an open corner three. All of this may suggest that Nash was ball screen reliant, but this isn't true. His remarkable passing ability showed up in the open floor. And check out this Johnsonian entry pass to lead Stoudemire right under the net. And it was usually Nash's supreme basketball IQ that would rule the day regardless of the defensive look. After drawing two on this take, the obvious read is to hit the dunker spot, but Nash recognizes that the ambiguous Odom could easily collapse on the pass, rendering the subsequent kickout very difficult. So he makes a mid-air adjustment to hit Stoudemire on the elbow, which gets the ball popping. And watch how Nash reads Smush Parker on this play. Noticing his tag, he looks to spray to the corner, but hits the ball around so that Parker can't play the passing lane. Nash's amazing court vision and accuracy also made themselves clear in the half court, with more Nash dribbling helping him to access these windows. The pick and roll was used because it was the most surefire way to guarantee a predictable advantage, not because Nash was supposedly incapable of playing outside of it. In all, Nash was probably more ball dominant than Johnson had been, but this isn't at all to say that he trusted his teammates any less. The focus has been more on Nash and less on his teammates, but it was Nash that opened up the floor so that his teammates could find easy offense. Nash's approach to ball movement reflects his answer to the age-old question: why pass? For Steve Nash and the run-and-gun Phoenix Suns, offense was a well-oiled machine to generate the best look every single time. And passes were simply the very well-oiled cogs that made the machine run. Nash's offensive brilliance allowed the Suns to rattle off one of the most dominant offensive decades in NBA history. Ultimately, these teams were so good because Nash himself always seemed to have a positive impact on the play. If he had had the ball, he was probably spoon-feeding a teammate an easy look. If not, it was probably because his team was on the power play when the defense decided that they needed to hedge against number 13. Previously, I attributed Nash's frequency of hedges to his pocket passing, and while this is true, it isn't the full story, because if Nash's pocket pass was so good, then why didn't teams just crowd the roller? The answer to this is obvious and intuitive. Nash would just score, which forces me to talk about scoring. Scoring has an enormous impact on any player's playmaking because it's inextricably linked to the type of coverages the defense shows them. An elite mid-range operator like Kawhi Leonard is going to see double teams. An excellent driver like SGA is going to see a zone. An excellent long-range jump shooter who can also punish any excessive defensive attention towards him with a pocket pass to his rolling partner was going to see a hedge. And this is how Nash exerted his game-changing pressure on the defense. But what about facilitators who didn't necessarily possess the threat of a long jumper? Well, as the sun was setting on southern Arizona, Nash and his squad growing progressively less threatening, the NBA's new point god would rise like a phoenix. Chris Paul has been dealing pick-and-roll dimes without a go-to pull-up three for what feels like forever, because he has such unique methods of pressuring the defense. So, when should I pass? If the defense is giving you more time and space to operate, use that time and space to pick them apart. Then set your teammates up for easy looks. It should be clarified that Paul, the formidable downhill passer that he was, with a particular love for the iconic alley-oop, was indeed drawing a lot of hedges and bigs playing high. But it was what he did without a hedge that was truly fascinating. With the extra time the defense gave him, Paul became a hypnotically patient player, grinding defenses down with one of the most secure handles of all time to lull unfocused helpers into making mistakes. While defenses can often feel like an uncontrollable fluid, CP3 waited a bit until it set, hardened into a shape with pores easily exploitable. Magic and Nash were able to slow the game down for themselves while keeping it fast on the outside, but Paul grinded it down to a halt for everybody, which was his comfort zone, dragging help defenders into no man's land where they incredulously left easy peasy reads wide open, or otherwise stumbled into trivial switches because Paul, like Nash before him, wasn't fazed by huge bodies in his line of sight. And with a slower moving floor, he could keep track of his teammates better than anybody else, or map the court, so to speak. So he knows on this possession that he has a trailing teammate ready to attack with a head of steam. And it was this court mapping, knowing and keeping track of where each of his teammates were, that made Chris Paul the model point guard. Many players are tormented by a frustratingly binding tendency to only look at their first passing read, but there might not have been a single player in history who is better at looking past the first read than CP3. Slowing the game down, he found passes that look obvious, and certainly not impressive, until you realize that so many stars can't consistently make them. His peripheral vision was superb, seeing Joe Ingles out of the corner of his eye here, and he had the prescience to be able to predict openings in dynamic scenarios. Like here, when turning off the screen, he sees Splitter at the nail, but also realizes that Jordan's roll will take Splitter out of the play, so Blake Griffin is actually wide open. And CP3, instead of trying to force feed Jordan, takes advantage. More impressive than slaying nail help as a 6-foot guard is being able to spray lasers to the opposite corner when the low man tries to help. Watching a clip like this one, you wonder whether Paul even sees Monte Morris rotating, or if he just knows that Morris will try to cheat into the lane and leave the corner wide open. Predictably, this all made Paul an excellent no-look passer, here flicking this beauty into the opposite corner as he sees Aaron Gordon step into the lane, without even so much as a glimpse. But more poignantly, they made Paul the king of the semi-advantage. Knowing where everyone and everything was, Paul had a strong grasp of evaluating when a possession would be better off in a teammate's hands. Here, the nail helper plays too aggressively, so this secondary hit puts the ball in rotation for an open shot.
Posey open.
Part of Paul's control over the flow of the game was his ability to time passes, just like his predecessors with many iconic connections to Devin Booker and JJ Redick before him, among many others. On top of hitting passes early in the passing window though, Paul had the ability to extend the passing window. With his pliability, he could let teammates catch up to the play while still fitting in a jump pass. That was what Chris Paul did with the extra time the defense gave him. Now, with the extra space the defense would give him, Paul used the same cognitive tools while weaponizing his extremely tight handle and ability to drift around the court while maintaining his balance to shift the weight of the floor and leave people wide open. With probably the best escape dribble game we've ever seen, Paul broke downhill to pull defenders into his orbit, which clumped up the defense and left shooters wide open. And with a variety of passing deliveries, he could get the ball out of a tough spot, here flinging it over his head. Chris Paul was the king of the snake dribble, cruising parallel to the free throw line here while avoiding the turnover to Joe Ingles until he has all 5 guys looking at him and the big is wide open. Changing the hand he drove towards allowed him to perform these sharp cuts into high pressure areas where every defender would be paying attention to him, and a no-looker here seals the deal. Just as useful was his nasty pullback dribble. And of course, just like before, part of setting his teammates up was an ability to also throw these beautiful floating entry passes and push the break.
First half of last year. Phillips missing. Paul has Butler cherry picking down the...
2 words for you. Steve Nash and Chris Paul. Must-see TV.
Nash and Paul could certainly play like the other. The former could absolutely slow the pace down or throw an amazing lob pass, and the latter could equally throw a high-velocity pocket pass while moving downhill. But while Nash was quick and twitchy and played super fast, Paul's patient ethic let him dominate the game mentally, and it's why he has all-time longevity and makes every team he goes to better. Steve Nash and Chris Paul felt similar, and their production certainly looked similar, but they arguably approached half-court offense with completely different stylistic preferences and processes. So their distinct playstyles, yet comparable production, reflect the true beauty of the pick and roll. So simple it can be run effectively by basically any guard, but so endlessly customizable that it offers infinite range and versatility of outcomes. So into the late 2010s, we started seeing scoring guards adopt pick and roll playmaking skill sets at a higher level, which saw the widespread popularization of so-called heliocentrism, where a single player, usually with an exorbitant on-ball usage and ball screen volume, assumes their team's primary scoring and playmaking responsibility. James Harden grew to be defined by this label across his MVP years in Houston. Luka Doncic loves scoring more than playmaking, but is one of the most breathtaking passers ever. And Darius Garland just got done with a very Nashian season, leading the Cavs to a historically good offense by controlling the game out of the pick and roll, drawing a hedge on a significant percentage of his ball screens, and being a great reset valve for his teammates. But the true next link in this time-honored chain is none other than Atlanta's polarizing Trae Young, who is one of the most unbelievable pick-and-roll playmakers ever. Young is an even better manipulator than Nash and Paul, and with some of the best passing touch ever, he is, for my money, the best lob passer in NBA history. Through his pick-and-roll dominance, Trae would lead the Hawks to an improbable conference finals run in 2021, giving the eventual champs a hard-fought battle before bowing out. 3 years later, Tyrese Haliburton would do the same thing, then one-up himself the following season with a storybook NBA Finals run. For now, Tyrese Haliburton is the last link in this chain, and his game is a lovely amalgamation of the ones who came before him. But if I could only compare him to one of these legends, I'd choose Chris Paul. Like Paul with a comfortable, ambidextrous handle, Haliburton glides around the floor, using changes of direction to pull defenders into his orbit and hit the resulting openings. With slick turning, Haliburton can pull maneuvers like this one, driving into this gap so that Anunoby stays home on top end instead of zoning up these two shooters, and Turner is left wide open. A pound dribble on this one helps him turn the corner, and he could also snake dribble like Paul or even Nash dribble. And despite the Pacers' identity of playing incredibly fast, Haliburton can also slow the game down and go through his progressions to find the best read, which of course lets him hit secondary reads at a high rate. But one area that I think Hallie has actually surpassed Paul in is his ability to extend passing windows. Haliburton is one of the most prolific jump passers ever, so when he's playing super fast and pushing the pace, jumping buys him time to read the floor and hit an opening or find new passing angles. But there are also elements of Steve Nash in this game. Haliburton too is an excellent pocket passer, and a great outside shooter. He also attracts plenty of hedges, which makes now a good time to mention something important. All of the players mentioned in this video were superstars, individually transcendent in one way or another, but many of their legacies are incompletely retold without mention of their most iconic teammates. Superstar facilitators elevate all of their teammates, of course, but it's the one or two players, usually bigs, that ingrain themselves in said player's lore. Haliburton is a little bit distinct from his peers in this respect, because his most iconic teammate is not an athletic lob threat, but rather the finesse-based Miles Turner. Turner is not a good screen setter or lob threat, but he does shoot threes and slash off the catch. So a lot of the time when Haliburton draws a hedge, instead of his team transitioning it into a 4-on-3, he has Turner drifting into open space for a jumper. Where 4-on-3s are in the hands of volatile teammates, which are high risk, high reward, Haliburton's usually result in an open shot for a pretty good shooter, Miles Turner. Due to his partnership with Miles Turner, Haliburton is one of the more prolific pick-and-pop operators mentioned in this video. And just for good measure, he has incredible vision in transition and is a great entry passer. With only 2 postseason appearances so far, Haliburton is still writing his story, but the similarities he bears to some of the game's greatest players are not coincidences, and studying him and them can bring some insight into which playmakers are point gods. For one, willingness. This is the most obvious and least interesting, but point gods have to be pass first. It isn't the point of the video, so I didn't mention it during their parts, but Steve Nash and Chris Paul were actually elite scorers and were often criticized for passing too much instead of taking over with buckets. Such is the life of a point guard, passing up good shots under the belief that your teammates would turn them into better ones. Another thing I didn't touch on in this video was touch distribution, letting a variety of players be the point guard and initiate offense, which isn't the same thing as a semi-advantage. Pundits rave over the 2025 Pacers because they're a quote-unquote equal opportunity team. When Hallie's not playing well, here's Siakam. When the stars aren't hitting, here's Nesmith or Nembhard. Hallie doesn't get credit for his teammates being talented, but he does get credit for not having an ego and letting his talented teammates do their own damage. This makes the offense more varied with more styles of attack, which makes them less volatile, less one-dimensional, and ultimately more playoff resilient. Attributing this to Haliburton feels strange because it's not his deed that the Pacers are a talented team, but peer across the lake and you find the 2025 Cleveland Cavaliers, whose offensive productivity hinged heavily on the aforementioned Darius Garland, who not only dominated games in the pick and roll, but got his teammates involved. Him being ineffective due to injury was all she wrote for the Cavs against Indiana, no matter how ostensibly talented they looked. So Hallie's touch distribution does move the needle, no matter how unimpressive it feels. Next, point guards must have great interior passing, ideally with one or many go-to inside reads. Whether it be Magic's entry pass, Nash's pocket pass, or Paul's lobs, being able to feed the interior is a hallmark of the very best playmakers. Every single facilitator mentioned in this video is an elite inside passer because not only is it the most reliable form of playmaking, but it forces adjustments that open up other forms of offense. Many great playmakers are great exterior passers, but this is less effective because outside shots are inherently volatile, so kick-out-based passers will invariably have bad playmaking nights production-wise, and need miraculous team shooting to beat out the most elite playmakers in the sport. The same isn't true for inside-based playmakers, because no NBA team is ever going to have a cold night on wide-open layups. And the inside pass being so reliable means that defenses are going to go out of their way to neutralize it, maybe giving up an open pull-up, or crowding the rim with defenders that would have otherwise been guarding the outside. Moreover, point guards must be comfortable playing in all areas of the court. While many players are spot reliant and look uncomfortable outside of certain areas on the floor, the point guards mentioned in this video use the entire court to their advantage, tiptoeing on the baseline or slipping in and out of tiny gaps to collapse the defense in unique ways or find unique passes. Attached to this is ball security. Haliburton is oft criticized for his handle not giving rise to shot creation moves, but he never turns the ball over, even as he drifts in to help defenders. Which brings us to micro skills, the first being change of pace and direction, which is needed for the aforementioned court usage, because getting to unique spots on the floor requires unique angles, which need unique changes of direction and pace. Second is ambidexterity, which allows players to access unique passing and driving angles, as we saw with Nash and Paul. These unique angles are what make special passers. Peripheral vision is next, which has obvious implications for court vision, but also contributes to ball security because it helps players avoid defenders jumping at their handles. High-level processing is another requirement for point guards, and this includes processing power, how much of the game you can read at once, and processing speed, how quickly you can. I didn't make explicit note of this, but if you were to go back to some of the passes I expounded on, you might appreciate how some of those decisions were made within fractions of a second. Finally, point guards obviously must have great court vision, composure, and passing ability, and it also helps to have a scoring arsenal that defenses respect. Using these principles, we can try to predict who's next. In a few years, a sequel to this video might be about Cade Cunningham, whose patience and ability to hit secondary reads and force feed the interior is highly impressive, and who I'd love to see take more strides as a ball handler. So when should I pass? Well, the ultimate answer is somewhat anticlimactic. A good pass leads to a good shot later in the possession, one way or another. The way a player interprets this reflects the type of playmaker that they are, while the depth at which they implement it determines if they're a good playmaker, a great playmaker, or part of the rich, long-standing heritage of NBA point guards.